Alara smelled like smoke before she even reached the market square, and that was how she knew something was wrong. She'd been 3 streets away, carrying a bundle of mended shirts back to Mrs. Yoon's shop when the smoke hit her nose, and underneath it, sharper, worse, the metallic tang of fear sweat. A crowd. Always a bad sign when the crowd was quiet. She pushed through the bodies until she reached the front, and then she saw her. Mira, kneeling in the dirt, wrists bound in iron, her dress torn at the shoulder, one guard's hand still fisted in her hair like she was an animal that might bolt. Her little sister, 17 years old, barely more than a child, was kneeling in front of the whole market with her chin trembling and her eyes fixed on some point in the distance, the way you look at things when you're trying very hard not to cry. Mira. The guard turned. Alara didn't care. She was already shoving past him, already had her arms around her sister before anyone could stop her. "What happened?" she breathed. "What did you do?" "What's going on? She stole grain from the royal storehouse," the guard said flatly, like he was reading a shopping list. 3 sacks. Caught red-handed. She wouldn't. Alara started, and then stopped, because Mira was crying now, silently, shoulders shaking, and that told Alara everything the guard hadn't. "I had to," Mira whispered. "Alara, I had to. You were at the shop, and Mother needed the medicine, and there was no money left, none. I checked 3 times, and I thought if I only took a little you could have told me. You already give everything you have. I couldn't ask for more." The guard yanked Mira back up by the arm, and Alara's whole body went cold. "Where are you taking her?" "To the palace. Theft from the crown is a matter for the king himself." A pause, and something almost like pity crossed the guard's face, quickly buried. "Sentencing's tomorrow morning. Alpha King Ronin doesn't tend to be merciful about theft. Not since the famine 2 years back. Made an example of the last 3. Alara didn't ask what the example had been. She'd heard the stories. Everyone had. That night, Alara sat by the single candle in their 1-room house, staring at the wall, doing math that never balanced. There was no money for a lawyer, no connections to any noble house, no favor to call in. There was nothing between her sister and whatever the Alpha King decided except air and bad luck. Their mother, thin and fevered in the corner bed, didn't know yet. Alara hadn't told her. She wasn't sure she could say the words out loud without breaking entirely, and breaking wasn't a luxury she had time for tonight. She thought about the king. Everyone in the kingdom had an image of him whether they'd seen him or not. Ronin, the alpha who'd taken the throne young and bloody, who'd ended 3 border wars with brutal efficiency, who was said to have a temper that emptied rooms and a face that had made grown men beg. She'd never seen him herself. Didn't want to. Wanted, more than anything, to never be in the same square mile as a man capable of making an example. But her sister was going to stand in front of him in the morning. So, Alara made a decision that felt less like bravery and more like the absence of any other option, and at dawn, she followed the guard's cart to the palace gates. The palace was enormous in a way that made her feel physically like less of a person. Stones stretched up farther than she could comfortably look, and everything gleamed gold trim, polished floors, banners so clean they looked freshly painted. Alara stood in her patched dress at the base of the front steps and felt every seam of her clothing like an accusation. "You can't be here," a guard said, stepping in front of her before she'd taken 3 steps. "My sister's trial is this morning. Mira, the grain theft. Sentencing's not a public event. Girl, go home. Please." She hated how her voice cracked on the word, hated it, but there wasn't time to be proud. "Please, I just need to speak to someone. Anyone, before it happens." The guard's face didn't move. The king doesn't take petitions from street girls the morning of a sentencing. "Then I'll wait until he's not sentencing anything," Alara said. "I'll wait right here." She sat down on the palace steps. It wasn't defiance, exactly. It was closer to desperation dressed up as stubbornness, because she genuinely had nowhere else to go and nothing else to try. The guard looked deeply unimpressed and clearly hoped she'd get bored and leave. She didn't. The sun rose higher. Servants came and went, throwing her curious looks, occasionally something like pity. One kitchen girl, younger than Alara, slipped her a heel of bread around mid-morning without a word, which nearly undid her more than anything else that day had. By the time the doors opened and a different, more senior-looking guard stepped out, Alara's legs had gone half numb from sitting on cold stone for hours. "You're the one who's been sitting here." Yes, sentencing already happened. Alara's stomach dropped through the floor. What was decided 10 years hard labor in the northern quarries. He said it like it was a mercy, and maybe, by the palace's standards, it was. Alara had heard what happened to people sent to the northern quarries. Almost no one came back the same. Some didn't come back at all. "No," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, because something in her had simply refused to accept it as final. "No, please, I need to speak to him." To the king. There has to be something else. The guard studied her for a long moment. Something flickered behind his eyes, not warmth exactly, but a kind of weary calculation. His Majesty is still in the sentencing hall. He rarely sees anyone after, but he glanced back at the doors. "You've been sitting on these steps since dawn. I'll let you try. But girl, choose your words carefully. He is not a patient man." Alara stood, legs shaking, heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib, and followed him inside. Word count so far, 1,004. The hall was colder than the air outside, all stone and shadow, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust to the dimness after the brightness of the steps. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat a throne carved from black wood, and in it sat the man the entire kingdom feared. He was larger than she'd expected, even seated. Broad through the shoulders in a way that seemed almost architectural, dark hair pushed back from a face that gave away nothing, not boredom. Not interest. Not anything at all. He was writing something, didn't look up when she entered, and for one wild moment Alara thought she might simply stand there forever, invisible, until she died of old age on his cold stone floor. "Your Majesty." The guard's voice, respectful and careful. "This is the girl who's been waiting since dawn. Sister of the grain thief sentenced this morning." Now he looked up. His eyes were dark, and they moved over her once, assessing, the way you'd assess a stranger's dog before deciding whether it might bite. Alara made herself hold still under it, though every instinct screamed to look away. "You've been sitting on my steps all day," he said. His voice was low, flat, entirely without warmth. "Why? Because my sister doesn't deserve 10 years in the quarries for 3 sacks of grain," Alara said, and her voice cracked halfway through, but she kept going anyway. "She stole because our mother is sick and there was no money left for medicine. She's 17. She's never done anything wrong in her life before this. Please, I'm begging you. Take it back. Take the sentence back." Silence. The king regarded her with an expression she couldn't read at all. "Theft from the crown," he said slowly, "carries the sentence it carries regardless of motive. If I forgive every thief who claims a sick mother, I will have a kingdom full of sick mothers by next winter. Then punish me instead," Alara said. The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them, but once they were in the air, she didn't take them back. "I'll take her sentence. Send me to the quarries. Just let her go." Something shifted in his face, not softness, but interest. Sharp and sudden, like a blade catching light. "You'd take 10 years of hard labor," he said, "for your sister. Yes, you don't know what you're offering." "I know exactly what I'm offering," Alara said. "I've seen what comes back from the quarries. I'm offering it anyway." The king rose from his throne. He was even larger standing, and Alara had to fight the urge to step back as he descended the dais steps toward her, slow and deliberate. Like a predator that had already decided the outcome, and was simply enjoying the wait. "That's a foolish offer," he said, stopping a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to keep looking at him. 10 years is a long time to regret a decision made out of panic on a palace floor. I won't regret it. You will, he said, almost gently, but that's beside the point, because I'm not going to send you to the quarries either. Hope, sharp and painful, lit through her chest. Then I have a different offer, he said, one that doesn't involve either of you breaking rocks for a decade. What is it? He studied her for a long moment, and Alara had the uncomfortable sense of being weighed on some scale she couldn't see. Your sister goes free. No labor, no punishment, the debt considered paid in full. He paused. In exchange, you come live in this palace. 1 year. You'll serve as my personal attendant, not a maid scrubbing floors, but close, present, at my disposal for whatever I require of your time. At the end of the year, you're free to go, and your family's debt to the crown is settled permanently. Alara stared at him. That's it? A year of service? That's the offer. Why? She said slowly. Would you want that? You could have anyone in the kingdom serve you. Why me? For the first time, something almost like the ghost of amusement crossed his face. Because you sat on my steps for an entire day without leaving, and offered your own decade of freedom for your sisters, without hesitation. I find that I'm curious what a person like that is actually like, once the panic wears off. Alara's mind raced through everything that could go wrong with this, everything she didn't know about him, about what at my disposal might mean, about the 100 ways this could end badly for a girl with no power and no one to protect her. But underneath all of it was one simple fact. It wasn't the quarries. It wasn't a decade. It was 1 year. And her sister would be free by morning. I accept, she said. Mira cried when she found out, but not from relief, not entirely. A year, she said, gripping Alara's hands so tightly it hurt. A whole year, living in his palace, at his disposal. Alara, do you understand what that could mean? He's the Alpha King. He's not known for being kind. I know. You don't know. You don't know anything about him except stories. I know he offered me a year instead of you a decade, Alara said, quieter than she meant to. That's more than I expected from anyone in that palace. Their mother, weak but lucid enough to understand what was happening, had wept too, though her tears were softer. More resigned, the tears of a woman who had spent her whole life watching her daughters trade pieces of themselves to keep each other alive, and hated that this was simply one more trade in a long line of them. You'll write, her mother said, holding Alara's face in both thin hands. Every week, if they'll let you, and you'll come home the moment the year is done. Promise me. I promise. She packed almost nothing. There was almost nothing to pack, and by the following afternoon, a palace carriage arrived to collect her, plain and unmarked, driven by a man who didn't speak a single word the entire ride. Alara watched her narrow, familiar street disappear behind her and tried not to think too hard about what she was walking into. The palace, up close and from the inside, was even more disorienting than it had been from the steps. Endless corridors, all identical marble and gold trim, servants moving briskly with their eyes down, the occasional noble sweeping past in silk that probably cost more than Alara's family had earned in a decade. She was handed off from one attendant to another, first to be bathed, which felt strange and clinical after a lifetime of cold water from a bucket, then to be dressed in something plain but finely made, dark blue, nothing like the patched brown dresses she owned. His Majesty will see you before dinner, the attendant told her, tucking a final pin into Alara's hair with brisk efficiency. Try not to be late. He notices. Does he notice everything? The attendant gave her a look that was somewhere between pity and warning. You'll learn. She was led to a study rather than the cold sentencing hall, which somehow felt worse, more personal, more exposed. The king was seated behind a desk covered in papers, and he didn't look up immediately when she entered, the same as before. Sit, he said, without looking up. Alara sat. For a long moment, there was nothing but the scratch of his pen and the strange, heavy silence of a room built for someone far more important than her. She used the time to look at him properly for the first time, not the terrifying rumor of him, but the actual man. Dark hair a little too long, a small scar through one eyebrow. Hands that looked more suited to gripping a sword than a pen, but moved across the page with surprising precision. "You're staring," he said, without looking up. Heat rushed to her face. "Sorry, Your Majesty." "I didn't say stop." He finally set the pen down and looked at her, and there was something assessing in it again, that same weighing quality from the sentencing hall. "You've been given rooms near the East Wing. You'll take your meals with the household staff unless I require otherwise. Your duties will vary correspondence, occasionally accompanying me to functions, whatever I decide I need on a given day. Is that understood?" "Yes, you don't sound certain. I don't know what whatever you decide you need means," Alara admitted. "It's a fairly wide net." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close enough that she noticed it. "Fair. For tonight, it means dinner. With me. I find dining alone tedious, and my advisors are worse company than silence." "That's it? Dinner? Did you expect something else?" "I didn't know what to expect," she admitted, before she could stop herself. "The stories about you don't usually end with dinner invitations." He actually laughed at that short, surprised, like the sound had escaped before he'd decided to allow it. "No," he agreed. "I suppose they don't." Dinner was, against every expectation Alara had walked in with, almost normal. Not comfortable, exactly. She was too aware of every fork, every unfamiliar dish. The way the king ate with the kind of unconscious precision of someone who'd never once had to worry about running out of food. But he asked questions, actual questions, about her family, her work mending clothes, the neighborhood she'd grown up in, and he listened to the answers like they mattered, which unsettled her more than his silence had. "You mend clothes for a living," he said, turning a piece of bread over in his hands. "That's steady work?" "Steady enough, most months. Winters are harder. People make do with torn things longer when they can't spare the coin. And your mother's illness, how long has that been going on?" 2 years. It comes and goes. "Some months she can work a little, most months she can't." Alara hesitated, then added, "Because it felt strange not to, thank you. For asking. Most people don't." "I asked because I wanted to know," he said simply, like that was obvious, like curiosity about a servant girl's life was the most natural thing in the world for an Alpha King to have. She studied him across the table, the size of him even seated, the careful, controlled way he moved. Like a man permanently braced for something to go wrong. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Why did you actually offer me this deal? You could have let her go to the quarries. Most people in your position would have." He was quiet for a moment, turning his glass slowly in one large hand. "I told you why. I was curious. That's not a whole answer." His eyes lifted to hers, and there was something almost startled in them, like he wasn't used to being pushed on anything. "No," he admitted. "It isn't." He didn't elaborate further, and Alara didn't push, though she noted the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way something guarded slid back over his face like a door closing. Whatever the real reason was, he wasn't ready to give it to a girl he'd known for one day. That night, alone in the unfamiliar room they'd given her larger than her entire home back in the city, with a bed that felt obscenely soft after a lifetime on a thin mattress, Alara lay awake and tried to make sense of the day. Nothing about it matched the stories. The king who'd made examples of thieves, who'd ended wars with brutal efficiency, had spent an hour asking her about mending clothes and her mother's health, and had actually laughed at something she'd said. It didn't make sense. And that, more than anything, made her wary. The days that followed settled into an uneven rhythm. Some mornings she was needed for correspondence, copying letters, organizing his schedule, tasks simple enough that her lack of formal education didn't hinder her much. Other days he barely spoke to her at all, buried in council matters. And she was left to explore the palace grounds under the watchful, disapproving eye of various senior staff, who clearly didn't know what to make of a street girl suddenly living among them. The other servants were, at first, wary of her. A few were openly resentful. There was a particular under-housekeeper, a sharp-eyed woman named Greta, who made it clear through 100 small slights that she thought Alara had wormed her way into an easy year through some scheme or another. Personal attendant, Greta said one afternoon, not quite quiet enough to be private, to another maid as Alara passed. Bet I know what kind of attendance she's providing. Alara's face burned, but she said nothing. There was no version of defending herself that wouldn't make things worse, and besides, she wasn't entirely sure Greta was wrong to wonder, even if the wondering stung. She didn't know what she was to the king yet, beyond a bargain struck to save her sister. She tried not to think too hard about what a year of proximity to a man like that might do to her. It was 3 days later that she first felt it something strange, unfamiliar, a kind of pull low in her chest whenever he was near, a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat pressing against the palace windows. She noticed it first in the study, copying a letter, when he leaned over her shoulder to correct a line, and the scent of him, something like cedar and rain, hit her so hard she lost her place entirely. "You've written the same word twice," he said, close to her ear. "Sorry," she managed. "I'll fix it." He didn't move away immediately, and for one long, strange moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them gone thick and charged in a way Alara had no name for and didn't trust herself to examine too closely. She told herself it was nothing. A strange room, a strange man, a body confused by proximity to someone powerful, that was all. But it kept happening, small moments stacking on top of each other until she couldn't pretend they were coincidence anymore. There was the afternoon she'd been reading in the garden and looked up to find him watching her from across the courtyard, some unreadable expression on his face, and her whole body had gone warm in a way that had nothing to do with sunlight. There was the evening he'd caught her wrist, briefly, to stop her from knocking over an ink bottle. And the touch had felt like it went straight through her skin into something deeper. And there was the night, 2 weeks in, when a nightmare woke her gasping an old one, about the quarries, about Mira in chains, and she'd stumbled out to the corridor for water, only to find the king already there, tense and alert, like he'd felt something wrong before she'd even opened her door. "You're distressed," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm fine. Just a bad dream. You're lying." His eyes narrowed slightly, that same unreadable assessment she was starting to recognize. "I could feel it. Something woke me." Alara's stomach dropped. "You felt my nightmare?" He went very still, like he hadn't meant to say that at all, like the words had slipped out before he'd caught them. "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." But it wasn't nothing, she could tell that much even without understanding what it meant, and she lay awake long after he'd retreated to his own chambers, turning the strangeness of it over and over. Something was happening that she didn't have a name for, something that made her chest ache in his presence and made her feel unmoored the moment he left her room. She didn't have anyone to ask. Greta certainly wouldn't help, and the few kinder servants she'd made tentative friends with a kitchen girl named Poppy mostly didn't seem the type to know anything about whatever this was. So, she did what she'd always done when she didn't understand something. She watched, and waited, and tried to make sense of it on her own. It was Poppy, in the end, who accidentally answered the question for her over a shared meal in the kitchen a few days later. "You're glowing," Poppy said, studying her with open curiosity. "Ever since you got here. It's strange. I'm not glowing. You are. Alphas can usually tell, but even us regular folks notice sometimes, when it's strong enough." She said it so casually, like it was obvious, and Alara's pulse spiked. "Notice what?" Poppy blinked, apparently only just realizing Alara didn't understand. The bond. When it's forming, I mean. You get this glow, this pull, like you're standing too close to a fire even when you're across the room from someone. She studied Alara's face and her eyes went wide. Oh, you really don't know. Know what? Alara said, though some cold, certain part of her already suspected the answer, already understood the strange warmth in her chest, the way his scent had unmade her in the study, the way she'd felt his nightmare alarm through some invisible thread she hadn't known existed. You might be his mate, Poppy said quietly. The Kings. Alara set down her spoon very carefully because her hands had started to shake. She didn't sleep that night at all. Mate. The word turned over and over in her mind, strange and enormous, a concept she'd only ever encountered in stories told by the fireside, the idea that some pairs were bound by something deeper than choice, some invisible thread tying two people together whether they wanted it or not. She'd never imagined it could apply to her. Certainly never imagined it could apply to her and the Alpha King, a man who'd sentenced people to decades of hard labor without blinking. The next morning, she found him in the study earlier than usual, already bent over papers, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment before she managed to make herself speak. "Is it true," she said, "that I might be your mate?" His pen stopped mid-word. He didn't look up immediately, and the silence stretched long enough that she nearly turned and left, certain she'd overstepped some line she didn't know existed. "Who told you that?" "Poppy from the kitchens. She said Alphys can usually tell, and that I've been glowing or whatever the word is since I arrived." He set the pen down slowly. When he finally looked up, his expression was more open than she'd seen it, something almost like relief mixed with dread. "I wasn't going to tell you. Not yet. Not until I understood it myself. So it's true. I've suspected it," he admitted, "since the first night you were here. The scent. The way I could feel your nightmare through the wall. It isn't ordinary for an attendant to have that effect on someone." He was quiet a moment, jaw tight. "But I didn't want to force this on you. You came here because of a debt, Alara, not because you chose me. I won't add a mate bond to the list of things you never agreed to." Something in his voice rougher than usual, almost raw, caught at her chest in a way that had nothing to do with any mystical bond. "You've known for 2 weeks? And said nothing? What would you have had me do? Announce it the first night, before you even knew my name properly? You already came here under duress. I wasn't going to make it worse. She struggled for the word. That's actually kind of you. I didn't expect that." "Most people don't expect much of me beyond cruelty," he said, and there was something bitter in it, something old. "It's easier to be feared than known. Fear keeps a kingdom stable. Being known invites people to try and use whatever they learn against you. Is that why you're so guarded? Because people might use it against you?" He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face shifted, some wall lowering fractionally. "My father was Alpha King before me. He trusted the wrong advisor once a man who knew his weaknesses, used them to nearly bring down the kingdom. I watched what that cost him. I decided a long time ago I wouldn't repeat it, so you decided no one would ever get close enough to know your weaknesses at all." "Something like that," he admitted. Alara sat down across from him, slower now, more deliberate. "I'm not going to use anything against you. I don't even understand what a mate bond means yet." "I know," he said quietly. "That's rather the problem, isn't it? I find I want you to understand it anyway." The words hung in the air between them, warmer than anything he'd said before, and Alara felt her chest ache with something she didn't yet have a name for either, not quite the bond itself, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been building in small moments since her first night in that cold sentencing hall. "Tell me about it then," she said. "The bond. what it actually means, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he did. He explained it carefully, methodically, the way he probably explained council matters. The mate bond was rare. He said, not every alpha found theirs. Some went their whole lives without it. It wasn't chosen, exactly, more discovered, a recognition that happened on some level deeper than conscious thought. It could be resisted. It could, in theory, be rejected outright, though he said the word rejected like it tasted foul in his mouth and didn't elaborate on why. What happens if it's rejected? She asked. It's painful, he said simply. For both parties, but especially for the one rejected. I've seen it happen to others. It isn't something I'd wish on anyone. But it can be done. It can be done, he agreed. I won't force this on you, Alara. If at the end of your year here you want to walk away and never think of any of this again, I'll let you. The bond doesn't obligate you to anything you don't choose. She studied him, the careful way he held himself, like a man bracing for rejection before it had even been offered, like every soft thing about him was armored twice over, just in case. You really believe I might walk away? I think you came here to save your sister, not to fall in love with the man who sentenced people to the quarries you were terrified of, he said. I think it's entirely reasonable that you might resent the position you're in, mate bond or not. I don't resent you. You should be cautious of me, at least. I am cautious, she admitted, but not because of anything you've actually done, just because of everything I'd heard before I met you. Something in his face softened at that, unmistakably, and now that you have met me? She thought about it honestly before answering thought about the man who'd offered her a year instead of a decade for her sister, who'd asked genuine questions over dinner, who'd felt her nightmare through a wall and let it wake him rather than ignoring it, who was sitting across from her now explaining something enormous and strange with more patience than she'd known was in him. Now I think the stories only tell half of you, she said. Maybe less than half. He didn't say anything to that, but something shifted in the air between them, warm and fragile, and Alara understood, with sudden clarity, that whatever this was bond or not, it had already stopped being simple. Word spread through the palace faster than either of them wanted. Servants noticed things, the way the king's temper had softened in recent weeks, the way he sought out his attendants' company more than strictly necessary, the way Alara had started laughing more freely in the halls than any servant girl had reason to. Greta's resentment sharpened into something closer to genuine hostility. Careful, she hissed one afternoon, cornering Alara near the laundry rooms. Girls who get too comfortable around powerful men have a way of disappearing when they're no longer convenient. Is that a threat? It's a fact, Greta said. You're a street girl playing at being something you're not. When his advisors find out what's happening, and they won't let a mate bond with a nobody stand. Not when there are alliances to be made, proper matches with noble houses. You'll be sent home the moment it's politically convenient, and you'll have no one to blame but your own foolishness for believing otherwise. The words landed harder than Alara wanted to admit, because underneath the malice was a kernel of truth she'd been avoiding since the conversation in the study. She wasn't noble. She wasn't educated in the things a queen would need to know. She was a girl who mended clothes for a living, and no mate bond in the world changed the fact that half the palace would see her as nothing more than a temporary embarrassment waiting to be corrected. She didn't mention the conversation to Ronan. But that night, lying awake in her borrowed room, the doubt Greta had planted took root and grew, tangled itself around every warm moment they'd shared, and refused to let her sleep. The doubt didn't go away in the morning. If anything, it sharpened, fed by every small observation she made once she started looking for evidence to support it, the way certain nobles at court eyed her with open disdain, the way one advisor, a thin, watchful man named Corwin, seemed to track her every movement through the halls like he was cataloging weaknesses. "You're distracted today," Ronan said, 3 days later, watching her fumble through a stack of correspondence she'd normally have organized in half the time. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, you're lying again." "I'm starting to notice a pattern." She set down the letters, unable to keep pretending. Your advisors. They talk about alliances, proper matches with noble houses. I heard some of it, in passing. She hesitated, then made herself finish the thought. What happens to this, whatever this is, when the kingdom needs you to marry someone else? His expression went very still. Who told you that? It doesn't matter who told me. Is it true? There have been discussions, he admitted, and something cold settled in Alara's stomach even though she'd braced for exactly this answer. There are always discussions about alliances. It's the nature of ruling a kingdom bordered by 3 others with their own ambitions. So it is true. There are noble women being considered. There were, he said carefully, before you arrived. I haven't dismissed the conversations outright, because doing so without explanation would raise questions I'm not ready to answer. But Alara, he reached for her hand, and she let him take it, though her heart was hammering with something that felt dangerously close to panic. None of those discussions matter to me the way this does. The mate bond isn't a political convenience. It's not something I can simply set aside because an advisor prefers a different arrangement. But you haven't told them about it either. No, he admitted. Not yet. Why not? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. Because the moment I do, everything changes. You become a target for gossip, for scheming, for every noble house that resents being passed over. I wanted more time before that happened. Time for this to be simple, just between us, before the whole kingdom has an opinion about it. It made sense, in a way, and it softened some of the panic clawing at her chest, but it didn't erase Greta's warning entirely. There was still a wide gap between I haven't told them yet and I never will, and Alara wasn't foolish enough to pretend that gap didn't exist. I need you to promise me something, she said quietly. What? If it comes down to a choice between the bond and the kingdom's need for a proper alliance, I need to know now which way you'd choose. Before I let myself get in any deeper than I already am. His grip on her hand tightened, and his eyes, when they met hers, held none of the guarded distance from their first meeting. I would choose you, he said. And if that answer isn't enough to convince you, I understand, because I know what I look like from the outside a king who might discard an inconvenient attachment when politics demand it. But I've spent my whole reign refusing to be my father, refusing to let anyone else's ambition dictate the terms of my life. I'm not about to start with this. Alara wanted, badly, to believe him completely. Some part of her did. But another part, the part shaped by a lifetime of watching promises from powerful people evaporate the moment they became inconvenient, held itself carefully back, waiting to see if his actions would match his words when the moment actually came. She didn't have to wait long. The letter arrived 4 days later, delivered to Alara directly by a palace messenger who looked deeply uncomfortable handing it over. It was from her mother. And it wasn't good news. Mira's cough hasn't stopped since the rains started. The healer says it's settling in her chest. I don't have coin for the medicine she needs, and I'm too weak myself to work extra hours. Please, if there's anything you can send. Alara's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading. She found Ronan in the study within minutes. Breathless, the letter crumpled in one fist. I need coin. For medicine. My sister She had to stop, steady her breathing. The cough she's had for weeks has moved into her chest. My mother can't afford the treatment. He was already reaching for a drawer before she'd finished speaking, pulling out a small pouch heavy with coin, pressing it into her hands without hesitation. Send for the palace physician as well, he said. I'll write the order myself. He'll travel to your family directly rather than waiting for them to come to the city healer. The speed of it, the complete lack of hesitation, undid something in Alara's chest that Greta's warnings had wound tight. You'd send your own physician? For a street girl's sister? I'd send him for anyone I cared about, he said simply. That includes your family, Alara. It has since the moment you offered to trade a decade of your life for hers. She didn't have words for the gratitude clogging her throat, so she simply stepped forward and pressed her forehead briefly against his chest, and his arms came around her without hesitation, solid and warm, and for a moment the fear that had been gripping her since the letter arrived eased just slightly. The physician's report came back 3 days later. Mira would recover, with treatment and rest, though it would take weeks. Alara wept with relief reading it, and Ronan sat with her through it, saying nothing, simply present, his hand steady on her back. It was that same evening, calmer now, that Corwin the advisor requested an audience with the king and insisted, pointedly, that Alara be excluded from it. She waited outside the study, unable to hear more than fragments through the heavy door, but the fragments she caught made her blood run cold. Unacceptable, Your Majesty. For a servant girl to have this level of access to the royal purse, the Kestrel Alliance depends on a suitable match, and every week you delay, people are talking, sire, and talk becomes rumor. And rumor becomes instability. She didn't hear Ronan's responses clearly, only the low, controlled register of his voice. But when the door finally opened and Corwin swept out past her without a glance, his expression was thin-lipped and furious in a way that told her the conversation hadn't gone the way he'd wanted. She went in to find Ronan standing at the window, jaw tight. Some new tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there an hour before. "What did he want?" she asked quietly. "For me to end this," Ronan said. Formally, before it becomes in his words an embarrassment to the crown. "And what did you tell him?" He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten with dread even before he answered. "I told him I needed time to think." The words landed like a stone dropping into still water. "Time to think," Alara repeated slowly. "About what, exactly?" "About how to handle this without destabilizing an alliance that's taken 2 years to negotiate," Ronan said. And there was strain in his voice, real strain, the sound of a man being pulled in 2 directions at once. Corwin isn't wrong that the Kestrel match matters to border security. He's not wrong that talk about you has already started spreading through the noble houses, so you're considering it. The match. "I'm considering how to protect this," he gestured vaguely between them, frustration bleeding into the movement without setting the kingdom on a path toward conflict I spent years trying to end. "That's not the same as considering ending things with you, isn't it?" Alara's voice came out sharper than she intended, fear making it brittle. "You told me a week ago you'd choose the bond over the alliance without hesitation. Now you're telling Corwin you need time to think." "Which is it, Ronan? It's not that simple. It felt simple when you said it," she said. "It felt like a promise." "It was a promise," he said, voice rising now, frustration cracking through his usual control. "But promises made in private don't dissolve council pressure, Alara. I have a kingdom to run. Corwin isn't wrong that instability at the border costs lives, real lives, not abstractions. I have to weigh that against me," she finished for him, and something in her chest went cold and small. "That's what you're saying. You have to weigh the kingdom against me. That's not it is," she said. "Say what you actually mean at least. Don't dress it up as something gentler than it is." He was quiet for a long moment, and the silence between them felt worse than any shouting would have. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough, almost raw. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I've never had to weigh my own heart against the kingdom's needs before. My father taught me duty came first, always, without exception, and I believed him for 30 years. And now there's you. And I find I don't actually know how to choose. Not cleanly. Not without some part of me tearing regardless of what I decide." It should have softened her. In some ways it did the honesty of it, the vulnerability he so rarely showed anyone. But underneath the sympathy was a colder, more practical fear, the same one Greta had planted weeks ago and that had never fully died. She was a street girl who mended clothes. The Kestrel match was a princess, presumably educated in exactly the things a queen would need to know, presumably bringing exactly the security a border kingdom required. Weighed against that, what was she, really, beyond a bond he hadn't chosen and could, in theory, still reject? "I need to see my sister," she said abruptly. "She's recovering, but I need to see her myself. I need to go home for a few days." "Alara, please," she said, and her voice cracked on the word in a way she hated. "I need space to think too, Ronan, just like you do." He didn't stop her. Perhaps he understood, on some level, that stopping her would only make things worse. She packed a small bag that evening, and by morning she was in a palace carriage headed back toward the only home she'd ever known, leaving behind a man who loved her and a decision he still hadn't made. Home felt smaller than she remembered, and Mira, thinner from her illness but recovering, cried the moment she saw her at the door. "You look terrible," Mira said, which was such a Mira thing to say that Alara laughed despite everything, hugging her sister tightly. "You look better than your last letter made you sound. I'm fine." The medicine worked. Mother's finally sleeping properly again now that she's not worried sick over me. Mira pulled back, studying Alara's face with the kind of sharp attention only a sister could manage. "You don't look fine, though. What happened?" Alara told her everything, sitting at their small kitchen table with tea neither of them drank, the whole tangled story spilling out the mate bond, the advisor's pressure. The alliance with the Kestrel house, Ronan's admission that he didn't know how to choose. "So he didn't say he'd choose the alliance," Mira said slowly when Alara finished. "He said he doesn't know how to choose. That's different from choosing against you. It doesn't feel different." "It is, though." Mira wrapped both hands around her cup. "Alara, listen to me. You've spent your whole life choosing for other people, for me, for Mother, sacrificing whatever needed sacrificing so the rest of us could be okay. You did it again with this deal, walking into that palace to trade a decade of your own life for mine. But has it once occurred to you that maybe this is the first time someone's choosing for you? That the reason it hurts so much isn't because he's rejecting you, it's because you've never had to sit and wait for someone else's decision before, and it terrifies you not to be the one in control?" Alara stared at her sister, something in the observation landing harder than she expected. She struggled for words. "That's uncomfortably accurate. I've had a lot of time to think, lying in bed with a bad cough," Mira said, with a small, tired smile. "You ran because you were scared, not because you actually believe he's going to choose someone else. If you believed that, you wouldn't have been fighting so hard to hold on to the promise he made you a week ago. What if I'm wrong, though? What if he does choose the alliance? Then you'll survive it," Mira said simply. "The way you've survived everything else. But you won't know unless you go back and let him actually make the choice, instead of running before he gets the chance." Alara sat with that for a long time after Mira went to bed, staring at the candle burning low on the table, thinking about every moment since that first cold morning in the sentencing hall, the way he'd offered her a year instead of a decade, the way he'd sent his own physician without hesitation, the way he'd admitted, with more honesty than she'd expected from a king, that he didn't know how to choose between duty and his own heart. She thought about Greta's warnings, and about Corwin's fury, and about the Kestrel princess who was, by every account, everything a proper queen was supposed to be, in ways Alara herself never would be. And then she thought about the warmth in her chest whenever he was near, the way she'd felt his nightmare alarm through a wall before she'd even understood what it meant, the way he'd looked at her across a dinner table on her very first night and asked genuine questions about her life like it actually mattered to him. Fear had made her run. But fear, she realized, staring at the candle, had never once made her right about anything important in her life. She left for the palace at first light. The palace felt different returning to it, less overwhelming, more familiar. The corridors she'd once found disorienting now easy enough to navigate without thought. She went straight to the study, heart hammering, and found it empty. He's in the council chamber, a passing servant told her. Has been for hours. There's talk the Kestrel envoy arrived early. Alara's stomach dropped, but she made herself walk toward the council chamber anyway, refusing to let fear turn her around a second time. She reached the heavy doors just as they opened, Corwin sweeping out first, expression tight and unreadable, followed by several other advisors she didn't recognize, and finally, Ronan himself, looking exhausted in a way she'd never seen before. His eyes found her immediately, and something in his face transformed relief so raw and immediate it was almost painful to witness. "You came back," he said, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. "I never intended to stay away," she said. "I just needed to think. Mira helped me understand something I hadn't seen clearly." "What was that? That I ran because I was scared of not being in control of the outcome, not because I actually believed you'd choose the Alliance over me." She took a breath. What happened in there? With Corwin? With the envoy? Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close, weary and warm at once. "I told them the truth, that I have a mate, and I intend to honor that bond regardless of what alliance conversations were already underway." The Kestrel envoy wasn't pleased, but their princess, it turns out, has her own attachment back home she'd been hoping to avoid discussing. The alliance can still be secured through other terms, trade agreements, border patrols, nothing requiring a marriage neither of us actually wanted. Alara's breath caught. "You told them, before I even came back." "I told them this morning," he said, "because I realized, sitting alone in that council chamber after you left, that I'd been treating this like an impossible choice when it was never actually that complicated. I love you. That fact didn't change no matter how long I sat with Corwin's warnings about instability. All that changed was how much time I wasted pretending the choice was harder than it actually was." "You love me," Alara repeated, and something in her chest, some final knot of fear, finally loosened completely. "I have since somewhere around the second week," he admitted, "possibly since the first night if I'm being honest with myself, though I spent a great deal of energy denying it at the time." He reached for her hands, holding them like something precious. "I'm sorry I made you doubt it, even briefly. I was afraid, and fear made me hesitate when I should have simply told you the truth from the start." "We're both apparently terrible at this," Alara said, laughing despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Running, hesitating, doubting things that turned out to be simple all along. Perhaps we'll get better at it with practice," he said, and pulled her into his arms, and this time there was no hesitation in it at all, only certainty, warm and solid, and entirely undoubted. That evening, in front of the full court, Ronan formally announced the mate bond, and though a few noble faces registered surprise or displeasure, most simply watched with quiet interest as their king, known across 3 kingdoms for his ruthless efficiency and his impenetrable guard, looked at a street girl, in a borrowed blue dress like she was the only person in the room. Corwin, for his part, kept his objections to himself after that. Whatever argument he might have made, the sight of the bond fully claimed and publicly declared made further protest pointless, and pointless arguments were not something Corwin, whatever his other faults, tended to waste time on.